talking and I love that voice. All right. So we brought a group of individuals together because we said, because we are more than a software company and we want to partner with educators and then partner with students on the other end of that, we want to come together and address this big monster of retention. And although we have a lot of educators on our team, we knew we did not want to do that alone. So we invited a group in, and I often use this phrase many times. Thank you. Many times that we got lightning in a bottle that first experience. And what I mean by that is that we didn't really do an extensive kind of vetting process. We just kind of had an open cattle call of sorts, and we got very fortunate in that we had small programs, large programs, literacy centers, corrections, ESOL heavy, juvenile focused resources all across the map. And what Charlie and I love about that now is that it's not so compartmentalized that when you fall into one of those categories, we're presenting information and you say, oh, but I'm correction, so I can't do that. Oh, I'm online, so I can't do that. Oh, I'm hybrid, so I can't do that, when we can point you to people that have done it. And so this became just a wonderful, I've often said it's one of the most giving things that I've done. Oh, there's a Gen Z term for you, giving, it's giving. It's been one of the most professionally and really personally beneficial things for me. And so working with this group has just been lovely. And so we worked with this group in 2023. Our latest guide that's coming out or has come out, we worked with throughout 2024. So what you're going to see is a lot of information from these folks, learning just as much from the things that did not work as the things that did. And that's really one of the first things that we did in this group that we'll do here today. We do not need another acronym in education. I don't need to come up here and speak and you say, are you even speaking English? Because I'm trying to use these fancy teacher words, taking all that off the table. And this community was able to do that right away by just saying, I need help. I just need to get better, and I need to get better for my students. So when we start, we always like to kind of start here. Maybe. Yeah. Why aren't students coming to class? Okay, so if you're talking about retention, that's one of those natural questions you ask. Okay, why aren't students coming to class? And then that creates kind of this whole trigger. Go ahead, just the person next to you, just emote some feelings that you have about retention. How do you feel about retention? How does it make you feel in your soul when your students are not coming to class? Okay.
So yeah, when you're talking, I mean, I can't see it since the camera's on. Try to, an ideal way to be here, but I mean, they don't need to see us.
Okay, yeah, and just tell them I'm gonna try to
Yeah,
remember.
you immediately stand here. I'll just stand to your side.
Okay.
I can see you.
All right, y'all are a rambunctious group, and I love it. What kind of words did you come up with? Just shout them out. Tired. Ugly. Oh, I like that. Yeah. Okay, transportation, because then we see that as one of the, yes, childcare. I'm sorry. Oh, health. Yes. Jobs, work, kids, mental health, trauma, the whole thing. And then how does that make you feel? You see that roster go down and down and down and down. And so you start then to kind of, they're still simple questions, but then they kind of have a secular effect, right? So why aren't students coming to class? And then if they're not coming to class, we've seen the numbers, X amount of time spent in seat is X amount of measurable skill gains, you know, one of those big fancy things. So if students aren't coming to class, then they're definitely not completing the program. So then that becomes another issue. And so then you start saying, okay, what's going on? And we've already kind of thrown out some issues of some things that we've seen, some things that we know. But it's one of those things that I always love that thing when scientists thought they discovered the smallest thing in life, and then they poke at it and a whole bunch of other stuff comes out of it. That's kind of like what we have with retention too, right? Like we think we know some of these things, and the more you dig at it, the more all this other stuff comes out. And so then, of course, the logical thing is, how can it be stopped? How can we stick that proverbial finger in the dam of all these things leaving? And then here's a big question. And this is where the PLC from day one set the tone that we needed. And it was this, it was somebody saying, I just need to know what I'm doing wrong. What am I doing that's off-putting, or what am I not doing that's not keeping students in? And once that was gone away, once that was lifted, then we really got going, because really what people want is, we just want to help. And we want to help. We want to have the conversations about helping each other. But one of the things that we realized is, even with all those questions, we weren't necessarily asking the right questions. So the questions we started asking, we started to put into some of these categories, and it really became 6 categories that became the 6 anchors of student retention. The first question was this: who are our students? And this is a loaded question, because we can do a couple of things, and we're going to do some of them today. We can look at overall statistics. We can look at things that we know about adult learners and those characteristics, and that is very good information to have. We also have to look for the outliers, and we have to figure out how to get the information about those outliers and how we bring those into the equation. The second question we needed to ask is, what do our students need to learn? After we learn more about who they are, then that's going to give us an indicator of what they need to learn. But what you need to learn, and what you need to learn, and what you need to learn are all totally different things. So we kind of opened up this idea then of, what is student success? How do you define student success? And then, where do our students learn best? In what type of environment? And really the word we landed on, what type of culture are you creating for your students? The fourth question then became, how do we better understand our students? What's the medium for that? Questions, relationship, connection. That medium becomes that back and forth exchange that we are able to have there. And then, why do our students want to learn? That's in game, right? That's that, hey, what is making you, what made you pick up the phone? What made you walk in the door? What is that thing that prompted you? Because by and large, unless we got folks in transitional corrections, they don't have anybody showing up at their door knocking and saying, why weren't you in school? There's no truancy person that's there. So something is getting them up. What is getting them up? And that becomes that key motivational piece. And then, when can we best support our students? Spoiler alert for that, it's all the time. When can we best support our students? And then, how can we be ready for that? So we landed on this idea of retention anchors, because we thought about this idea: if your program or your classroom, and depending on, do I have admin here? Okay. And I got instructors. I got both. And I always like to ask this question: who are the people that you are the first face that student will interact with? Okay. On a daily basis or through the onboarding basis. Okay, good. We'll get to y'all in a second. So why retention anchors? If your program, if your classroom is this ship, and all your little babies are on that ship, and you need to come in, and you need to come into the harbor, and you need to set anchor. If you set one of those anchors, okay, that's pretty good. Your boat might not float off, but it's definitely going to turn around. And if any kind of storm starts to come in, that boat's going to start rocking back and forth, and people going to fall off the boat. So the more anchors you can put into place, the more stable that ship is going to be. And what we often say is, there is no magic pill for retention. If there was, we could write a book or set up a booth at COAB, and we would retire and do all the things, because there is no magic pill. And so it's holding ourselves accountable to try to put as many of these pieces working in concert together, because it's not a matter of if that storm of life is going to come. It's kind of a constant deluge, right? It's that when. And so when that boat starts rocking, inevitably, even with 6, 8, 10, 20, we're still going to lose some people off the boat. But what our PLC said, okay, but we can't let that stop us. I often say, I'm somebody that, yeah, tragically works in extremes. Charlie gets up and exercises every morning. He might get up and go run 10 miles. And I'm like, I ain't doing that. So I do diddly squat. And there's a big difference. Just because I don't want to run 10 miles doesn't mean that I can't walk around the block. So the point is, and we kind of coined this term in the PLC, we keep showing up for the ones that show up. And what does that look like? And so that's where our 12-month journey began. So let's start here. Knowing your audience. Who is the adult student? Who would say, I have a pretty good idea of who my students are. Okay. Who would say, I'm doing okay, but there's more I need to do. Okay. The basis of this guide really became a lot of reflective material. And some of that was easy, and some of it was really, really hard. And I'll be sharing some of the stories for those more difficult portions. But this is one. So, who is the adult student? Knowing things about our audience. And there are really 7 key categories. If we go back to Malcolm Knowles and we look at adult learning theory and all of these things, there's 7 key things about adult learners that, again, you're going to have your outliers, and we have to be careful there. But we need to have an awareness of these things. The first is adult learners are diverse. I know y'all probably got one gender, one age, one culture, one language, all the same things. If you do, that's wonderful, I guess. But we've got different. Okay, so let's just throw it out. Who has a wide variety of ages? Who has a wide variety of cultures, languages, the whole deal? Who's got a wide variety of genders? Okay, we're all across the board. We're all across the board on that. We're all across the board in school experience, school background, having those less than favorable. It's a light way to say that, those less than favorable traditional K-12 experiences leading up to this. So we know there's a lot of diversity that's going on in our classroom. The other one looks really simple. Adult learners are busy. Okay, we know that. The follow-up question there is, what are they busy with? And that's something that, again, is one of those things, you know this, but you start tapping at it and a whole bunch of other stuff comes out. We also wanted to dive into adult learners tap into personal experience. There's a recess in our brain that we can go back when we see something or we learn something, we're going back and we have those memories that come there. And so, you've got your things. That's why we talk about contextualized instruction and using these real life examples, because we know that about adult learners. Totally different than a child's brain, right? Because they're learning things maybe for the first time and don't necessarily have those life connections to make there. Adult learners are uniquely motivated. The reason for why they pick up that phone, walk in the door, all of those things is very, very different across the board. And they may even think that it's for one thing, but it's for something totally different. So getting into those motivations is important. Adult learners enjoy control over their learning. I am an adult learner. You are an adult learner. I do not want to sit in front of a screen and have a tap dancing octopus tell me how to do fractions. I want to be able to control the material that I'm interacting with. If I've got a crazy schedule, I want to have options to be able to learn when it's good for me and have these flexibility things. That autonomy is really, really important for adult learners. The other thing we know is that adult learners are results oriented. You ever had a student come in and say, yeah, I need to get my GED because I need to apply for this program. You think I can do that in about a week? True story. It happens a lot, right? I had somebody call and say, it was a Tuesday. Hey, I'm taking my test on Thursday. You think if I go through some lessons on your program, I'm gonna be ready? You can try it. So, but it's that human nature, right? Like, we're all results oriented. Good night. We live in a culture where you have a blanket with sleeves on it because we don't want to get up. We want to put the TV on right there. We don't want to get up and try to do all these things. We are in a comfort society. We are in a fast driven society. We stand in line at Starbucks with one of these in our hands. I can pay my mortgage. I can text my daughter. I can rally with Charlie about a webinar. I can pull up the slides on here and start working. And I'm still complaining about how long it's taken to get my coffee. That's that results oriented culture, and it fuels that. Adult learning is slower but deeper. When you combine this with that third section of adult learners tap into personal experience, this is one thing that I really like to talk about and stress with those of you that have older students that get into that mode of, well, I'm older. I'm not like those younger students that come in here. I don't learn as fast as they do. And you can confidently tell them, no, you don't learn as fast as they do. Me as your teacher does not learn as fast as you do. Our brains are not wired to that. But here's the advantage you have over that student. Because you have more life experience, you have a whole lot more personal experience to tap into. So it might take you a while to get it, but once you do, it's pulling from this deep well, as opposed to, even a younger student, a 12-year-old that is taking it, but they're also losing it very quickly because they don't have those life experiences to draw from. The more we know about adult learners, the barriers they face, and how these barriers interfere with their learning, the better we can structure classroom experiences that engage all learners and stimulate both personal growth and reflection. There's a lot to unpack there. But so I'll tell you what the assignment was for the PLC. So we looked at these 7 different characteristics, and then we said pick one. And over the next month, I want you to research that one thing. I want you to learn more about how your adult learners are diverse. I want you to learn more about how your students are uniquely motivated. Design a lesson, design an activity, come back and tell us what you found out. So the results there are in the guide, or some of their stories, things that worked, didn't work. So that's where I kind of challenge you all with now. If you had been in that PLC and you had to pick one of these things, turn to a partner and tell them which one you would have picked. And then we'll ask y'all. So if you had to choose one of these things to research for 1 month, what would it be? Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to kind of keep the people engaged.
No.
I can.
Yeah, we'll ask some questions. Hi, online. We see you.
No, I'm talking to him.
Okay, and Charlie's got you online too. I can't see you as well as he can.
Can I share what I would take when we come back?
100%. Yes. Yeah, we got to keep.
Fine, it's starting. We have 60 more minutes. So I have the guides here to come back again. If we want to say, you can stick around. You can see.
And those are the new guides, right?
Those are the 10.
Okay, good. Yes. Because I got thinking about that. I would have grabbed a box of the new guides, not even thinking. It's tight here right now, yeah. You know, reference. All right, what did y'all come up with? I know we're going to get some comments online too. Which one would you have picked and why? Charlie's going to tell us which one he would have picked first.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think about these, as I spent time in the classroom and as kind of a program manager, the control over their learning and the results oriented, I think were 2 that I found that.
Anybody else pick that you would have picked that?
I don't want to say they were lacking, but that's such a tension, because I think as teachers, some teachers maybe more than others want to kind of control the flow of information, and here's how we're going to do it. And as adults, right? I mean, thinking about this presentation, if you knew all the points that we were going to make today, you would probably say, well, I don't need those first 10. I don't need those last 10. I want those 5 middle ones. You say, I only need to be here for 10 minutes. I don't need to be here for 2 hours, right? We would all do that. That's why we zoom into the middle of the YouTube video to find what we're looking for, and we find it, and we don't watch anything else. So that's how our students are, right? But they have to sit through the whole class to get that 1 or 2 things they need. And so I think for me, that would be something I would want to spend more time with if I was working with a group of teachers. Kind of pull that thread with them. So how are you sharing that tension of giving them control and autonomy, but how do you then guide them towards the things they need to learn? What else? Let's get a couple of examples.
Adult learning is slower but deeper. And I work in a nonprofit in Memphis, Literacy Mid-South, and we are really doing a train-the-trainer model. So you have a lot of people who have been doing a job for 30 years in like workplace, but they don't necessarily know how to teach it to employees. So we're really thinking about slower but deeper learning and how to share that with people who want to be instructors. And what can we do to provide them professional development?
And that's a really good point. And it's one of the things that we often talk about. We are all adult learners. So that we always take these things into mind when we're out doing PD. And the other part I will add to that is anything we can do to drop that us versus them persona that exists, because we are all adult learners and we're learning this together, changes the game when it comes to making those connections that we need to make, because we are all adult learners. Because I know you're reading through that and you're like, oh, that's me. That's me. That's me. Anybody else, what you would have chosen?
Well, Pedro from our online community.
Come on, Pedro.
He said he'd pick adult learners are busy. I think he's just talking about, as we've already kind of said, how it just comes down to time management and how they have so many things going on. And if we can address those needs or help them, then they can focus. So I think that's true, but it's figuring out what are those things that make them busy. What
those things are. And I always say there's a lot of folks that are really honest and they're like, I don't need to learn any more about that. I feel pretty confident about that. But there are some folks at the PLC that they push themselves to do that. And one of our amazing educators out of Odessa, Texas, she dove into that one, and she wanted to know not only why are they busy, but how did they get here? So she added a question on their orientation form that said, why did you leave the traditional high school environment? And in looking at that question, she looked back at some other resources 2 years back, 3 years back, all the way back to 5 to 7 years back in some cases. And she discovered that anywhere between 27 and 30% on any given year of her students left the traditional classroom because they got pregnant in high school. We know that we can't solve all the world's problems. We can't be the transportation and the childcare and all of those things. But what she has done now is that when they have that tiny little sliver of discretional funding that comes in, that's where it goes, because she knows that she's servicing with the data to prove it more than 25% of her community. So it's just digging into those things. And if you don't know, you can't do.
At it like adult learners are diverse because we're looking at the word diversity, meaning like it's the top of the umbrella and basically all of those things fall underneath it. So it's not just a culture of it, but it's just like their lives, you know, their workplace and everything like that. So we think the diversity part of it because it could be so much.
And you're right. Like, as I'm looking at now, there's diversity in why we're busy. There's diversity in our personal experience. There's diversity in our motivation, all of those things. That's a really good way to look at it. Cause I do think we get stuck there. So yeah, because I had a teacher say, well, you know, all of my students are this, because there were a lot of similarities from the things that we think about diversity. And I'm like, let's dig down into that. So I like that insight a lot. So deep dive here. Really, really leaning into that. In the retention guides that you'll get today, you will see some of the ways that those teachers that explored these different aspects, how they did that. And they're going to tell some of their stories, some of their narratives, and then there's a research component to that in there as well. So there's that first anchor. Who is your student? Knowing your audience. So that second anchor then becomes, now that I know who my student is, how am I going to use that information? Because it's a lot of times we can get, oh, that looks great, and then you throw it in a drawer. Oh, that's good information, and then you don't move forward. So how are we going to use what we found out about who our students are to then what we need to teach? And so we got into this concept of just-in-time learning. Anybody familiar with that term? Okay, I got a head nod. Tell me what you know about just-in-time learning.
Well, not necessarily learning, but from like
Oh yeah, I know what you're going to say. Say it.
That standpoint where
Yep.
you have your materials and stuff delivered just in time for you to get it out, so it's not sitting and staying in the warehouse.
Yep. And who did that?
Huh?
Who did that? Do you know who did that?
I didn't know.
Yeah.
that.
But I mean, you knew the what.
There you go. 5 points.
Yes, I know, right? Toyota. So Toyota came up with this concept of just-in-time learning. They realized, okay, and there's so many things. So now that this young man has told us, okay, it's a business, but we're going to make an educational connection. Think about their production system for an automotive company, and you've got all of these cars. Now, they don't always just do all the, what are some Toyota names? All the Toyota Camrys and all, you know, I was going to say Civic, and I know that's not right. They're not coming down the line like all in order, right? There's trucks and cars and all these things all coming at one time, and they're going down this conveyor belt. And what they were doing is they would go through all these processes, and they had people kind of watching. Okay, you know, that looks good. All of these things. They get down to the end, and then something wouldn't work. They didn't isolate a variable. They didn't know what was there. So what they started to do was introducing more checkpoints in that. And so it's that concept of, okay, what does this person need right now? You know, so we're going to check now. Oh, something's off here. Let's figure that out before we move on. It's making that stop and that investment there to, if you see something, you see that connection that's not being made. You see that, oh, I had trouble with this in the past, so I'm not even going to do it. You see those things start to come apart. And sometimes those vehicles need to be moved off the production path, right? So that the others can keep going and we can spend some time there. But once that investment's made, then they go back on and they can keep going. And the idea there is that the progress is slower, but it's just that. It's progress. It's moving forward. And as this young man shared, then having the materials that they need and the tools that they need at that time. So that's where it becomes onerous then on us to be the curators of those materials and those things. So just-in-time learning strategies, as we were doing research with the PLC, we discovered that they set the stage for these aha moments. Okay. Everybody heard aha moment? You've also heard eureka, whatever that is. What little cartoon thing do you think of when you think of aha? Bing, is that little cartoon light bulb that comes up above. There's actually a scientific reason of why that comes up. That light bulb comes up because those little neurotransmitters, when you do all kinds of neuro research tests and you wear that little cap that looks like a little spider web with all the legs on it, and it comes in there. So there's lots of studies. One of them in particular, they had a group of adult learners come in and they said, okay, we're going to give you a bunch of puzzles, and as much as you can, and some of them were mazes, and I get this more as an example, as much as you can, I want you to push the button, not when you've completed it and entered your information on the little puzzle, but when you figured it out, like the instant that you figure it out. So imagine if I'm looking at a maze and I'm kind of tracing it with my eyes and I'm like, oh, I know what to do. Jink. When you figure that moment that you figure it out, that light goes. And so that's that light bulb moment. And so what do we need to do to get more and more of those aha moments? So how, in other words, do we prime the brain for aha moments? Well, part of that is on our end with that just-in-time learning instruction in meeting immediate, being predictive, and being targeted. So if we are truly knowing our student, we're starting to get to know some of the things that they need. We're starting to look and observe, ooh, I know that Roger has struggled with fractions in the past. So when we get to this point, I'm going to be on the lookout for that. And I'm going to have something there to support that. So I'm being predicted and then I'm being targeted. I know that I'm introducing a new story today. We're going to work through a passage and it's got some really funky vocabulary words. And half of the class really struggles with that. We're going to take that. We're going to pre-teach that vocabulary. So those things, so that when that student gets to that point, they're armed with that tool. They don't have to go off that proverbial production ramp. They can still have their moment of, oh, I don't like this. It feels uncomfortable. We need to be uncomfortable sometimes. It feels uncomfortable, but I can grab that tool and then I can keep going. Let's see, collective research from the PLC highlighted 6 effective elements of just-in-time learning. In other words, what is going to set the stage for those aha moments? What can we do so that we are feeding that? We're putting things into, bless you, we're putting things into the soil, the miracle grow, so to speak, that we're putting there into the soil. And these are the 6 things that they found. But I want to hear from you first. What do you think some of the things that they found? What would you say primes the brain for an aha moment? What gives that experience? Okay, somebody's making a connection. Yep. Okay, yes, having relevant material for sure. What else? Anybody else?
An accomplishment?
Yeah. I love this quote. We use it all the time. Someone said the most formidable foe that we will face in the adult education classroom is confidence. So if they have a series of accomplishments that have built up to that, and then you come across something that, oh, I've interacted with that before, that's really setting the brain for some aha moments. So it's going back and repeating some of that material. And that's one of the things that our PLC found. By and large, however, this was the top one: mood and excitement. We talked about this in our trauma session earlier today. We ourselves and all of our students carry an invisible backpack around with us all the time, and all the things that go into that. Think about what happens when you walk into your classroom. I'm sure you're not like me and you're just, this is my lesson. This is what I'm going to do. I'm totally focused on this. You're not worried about bills or your kids or your car problems or any of those things. I'm being very sarcastic here. All of those things are coming in. And so then our students are bringing that in too. And so our researchers in the PLC, you'll see there in the guide, they did some activities and they suggest some activities to, as much as we can, kind of change that environment. Have that 3 to 5 minute, whether you call it a brain break or a brain primer, or whatever that looks like for you, to help your students make that transition as much as possible. Because when our brains are cluttered with all that stuff, we don't have any room for it. So that mood and that excitement. well, we'll talk about that in a second. The mood and excitement becomes really important. Shared ideas. There's a lot of research, and we'll talk about this when we get to relationships, but there's a lot of research right now that yes, the teacher to student relationship is really, really important. We know that, and it's got multiple benefits on both sides, but there's a lot of research that's saying that the stronger relationship, the more influential relationship in the classroom is the peer-to-peer relationship and the ability to share ideas back and forth. Because if you've got somebody, you never should say, I know exactly how you feel, but if you know somebody that's walking through similar circumstances, as much as we try, and we're going to get into that and we're going to try to contextualize that, that friend or that classmate next to them knows parts of their life in a way that we might not. So those shared ideas, and you've seen it all the time, right? You'll be trying your best. I've had it happen all the time. You're bending over backwards to explain something. I'm talking to this young lady. She looks so confused. And then her friend leans over. She's trying to say this. And it's that like, let me explain it in a different way. And so when we talk about culture, what does it look like to create an environment that's conducive to those shared ideas? The other thing was background knowledge. Charlie and I have a whole separate session on background knowledge that you can find on our website. Basically, long and the short, there's a lot of research, especially as we talk more about literacy and the science of reading right now, that are saying that the gold standard of comprehension is maybe not the gold standard that we think it is. Yes, it's important, but there's a lot of research that saying that background knowledge has a heavier pull and is more influential when students attack reading passages than comprehension. And so building that background knowledge, building that context is really important. I could talk about that for a really long time, but we're going to try to get through this today. Yes. Speed of instruction. And it's kind of what Charlie was just saying. For some students that already know that, come on, I want to keep going. Again, they don't want to waste their time. They're results oriented. I don't want to wait for that. But then you're inevitably going to have students that are in the back doing this drowning motion, like, wait, slow down, slow down, slow down. And so that again gets into that diversified and differentiated instruction. But the speed of instruction, someone will check out if the speed of instruction is not meeting what they need at that time. Student reflection, we don't do this enough as educators, but then allowing our students to just take a beat. Again, we're used to that culture of go, 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 but there's a lot of value in just sitting in something and really reflecting on that before you move to the next thing. So the PLC gave some examples of what they've done to build reflection in, but then this one became a big one, and it was repetition. And so we talked about, with that same analogy of that light bulb moment, maybe it's not a light bulb. Maybe it's more of like a dimmer switch, that just slowly comes up. Or maybe it's not an aha moment. It's an aha moment. I see it. I need to see it again. I need to see it again. I need to see it again. And then bam, now I've got it. And then once you've got it, then you've got all of that background that you built up to that. So repetition became a really big part of that. Anything you want to share in this section?
Yeah, I was
before we move on?
just thinking about the reflection and the shared ideas, and I wish we as educators, and maybe some of you all do this a little bit more at the end of the class and then the week, would allow our students to reflect on what they just learned. Hey, what did I synthesize, and what's in my brain, and what do I still need help with? And I'm just thinking through the idea of, what if a student could honestly articulate, I still don't understand, or I see this word, I've seen this word 6 times on every single page, I still don't know what it means, and they wrote that down somewhere. And then what if they were to share that with, if there was a nice culture where that could happen, they shared that with the student next to them, and they're like, you know what? I didn't know that either, but here's how I figured it out. And then they could kind of share that all of it back to the student. And so just maybe figuring out a way where you could even pair some of those up. But yeah, I think the more reflection we can do, and then having the students step back from their kind of thinking and their learning, I would assume we would be getting more of these aha moments.
And to Charlie's point, one of the things that some of the folks in the PLC said, okay, it's great to have that internal reflection, but just like Charlie was saying, sometimes you need to share that reflection because you don't know how that's going to be a game changer to somebody else. And so it's when we first put this out, one of our seasoned teachers said, oh, think alouds are back. And I was like, well, I don't think they ever left. We probably just called them different things, metacognition or whatever it is. But it's you being able to say, okay, when I see this, this is what I do. And walking through that problem and literally talking out loud. The first thing I do is I read the questions first, and then I go back and I read the title, and then I scan for all these important words. How would you do that? and then inviting another student to come up. That does two things. It helps that student articulate their thought process, but man, it is observational data gold for you, because watching how a student attacks even a reading passage is going to inform you in how they would attack something in math. Oh, that makes sense. That's where they would go with that. If you have any student that is in generational poverty, I really, really encourage you to do those exercises, because if you are a generational poverty expert, you can look at a writing sample from someone who has been in generational poverty and someone who has not, and be able to tell the difference. And it all has to do with that thought process that revolves a lot around how you chronologically put things into practice. Yeah, I could talk about that for a long time too, but I won't. All right, so here's this big piece. So we're getting to the two pieces of those anchors. If there are larger anchors or they're heavier anchors, this one and the next one would be that glue of retention. And it is that culture piece, fostering an environment for student success. Ideal classroom culture must be defined. All right, here's another exercise for you. So I want you to say you're going into a restaurant, and when you go into that restaurant, either a student or somebody that's been in your program, whatever, they're sitting in the booth behind you, and they start talking about your classroom. Or if you're an administrator, they start talking about your program. What are the things that you would want to hear? Turn to a partner and tell them what you would want to hear.
I just texted some of the other implementation specialists, see if they want to come up. I could really just take those boxes and maybe just in a big foyer area, just maybe almost just like an acre line, and they have 3 or 4 areas and it's scan that, scan that, like they do.
That's a great idea.
We could probably just get there like in 2 minutes.
And we need to tell the online audience where they can get that, and it's with those free resources.
Yeah, let me see if I can. Let me see if I can
Okay.
copy those and put it in the chat.
Yes. Yeah. All right, if you're joining us online, same thing, go ahead and pop in. Charlie will read them. What are the things you would want to hear about your program? You would want to hear.
Yes, you don't have the specific thing, like there are.
I can try to look it up while they're still talking. Yes, and then.
I'll just.
And then when you get there, then it's gated, so they'll have to enter in some information. All right, what did y'all come up with? What would you want to hear? They're talking about your program. Maybe they're talking about you.
Let me share a couple of the.
Yeah, we got some in the online.
Here.
Yeah.
The information was broken down and the points were I can actually understand. I want to hear that my class is welcoming, inclusive, and easy to understand, that the teacher stays on me to the point where I have no choice but to move forward. Relaxed, warm, and encouraging. They feel safe to grow and learn. They know they can make mistakes and they will still be encouraged to keep going. What else? Those are from our online attendees. Anything else?
I think the students want to know that you care about them as an individual, not just as a number in the class.
Yeah.
And you have to make that connection by having a relationship with them.
Mhm. And we often say in adult ed, we are not given a clean slate when it comes to that. Charlie knows we make fun of each other a lot. We're in the redemption business. We're redeeming past experiences. So you're not coming for some students, especially if they've had those less than favorable experiences. When they look at you, they aren't making that automatic assumption, this woman wants to help me, she cares about me, she wants to be a part of my life. You're representing some of those ghosts of the past that come into that. And so we've got work to do there on the front end of that to redeem some of those experiences. What else?
I want students to think that I'm resourceful, not just school related. So if they came to me with any kind of problem or anything that they needed, I would be able to help them get to where they needed to go.
Mm-hmm.
Resourceful, not just school related.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that we talk about in our trauma session is creating a resource guide, because teachers are not counselors for the most part, unless you've got a dual degree and we've got enough things. We need to be able to equip our students with resources, walk alongside them when they do that, because we don't want to leave them and hand them off to somebody else, because that's probably happened to them before. But have those resources and what that looks like. Real quick, what are the things you would never want to hear? I love it. Somebody said that from the back of the room with 300 people in Arkansas. And I was like, oh, praise be, because you're just keeping it real. I love
What
it.
did she say? Repeat it for the online.
Oh, do
Are
I?
you allowed to repeat it?
Yeah, I can. She said, oh, they suck. Yeah. Hey.
Well, which could mean a lot of things. It could mean you don't listen to the students, you're not paying attention. It could mean that they're not making progress, and it's
Mhm.
like, that's when I think of that question, the thing I always think about, I think that what I would hate the most, which I think comes back to the retention, is that it's a waste of time. But they show up, as we talked about, they're busy, right? But they're giving up their very valuable time. They're coming to your class and then they leave thinking, I just wasted 2 hours. I didn't learn anything.
Mhm.
They are not going to come back. In my
Mhm.
mind, that's one of the number one reasons why they would not show up the next day, because it's like, well, I've got a lot of other
Mhm.
things I could do with my time. Why would I go back there and sit there and then
Mhm.
ignore me and me not learn anything? So.
Yeah, and your chances to blow that are going to be pretty
Mhm.
limited too.
Yeah.
What else? What would you hate to hear? Yes.
They treat me like I'm less than.
Okay. Us, them.
Treat me like I'm less than.
Yeah. Yeah. What else?
They don't care about me.
They don't care.
Mm.
They don't care. That's probably one of the ones I think gets all of us, because I mean, I'm sure when you were, going through school and graduate school, you said, man, I'm really looking forward to going to adult ed, because I heard that paycheck is amazing. There's an individual that wrote a book that teaching is one of his things is like, teaching is an act of the heart, but that's where most of us get into it. And so outside, well, let me ask you, what do you think outside of money and some political things, what do you think the next reason is why teachers are leaving the classroom? Burnout. Just dig into that a little bit. What could be, they don't feel respected. So I think those two kind of things go together. They don't feel that the work, because you're bending yourself over backwards. You're putting all of your You're putting all of your heart into it. Many of you are putting your pocketbooks into it as well. And so that is, while we would all like to have that paycheck bump, that's not necessarily something that can be solved there. Same with our students. There's a heart issue that's there too. Fundamental thing that we know about human beings, we want to be seen. We want to be known, and whether we like it or not, we were built for connection. And that's the same thing. I'm an extroverted introvert, meaning I'm going to do all this until about 5 o'clock. And then I'm going to have my leopard print pajamas in my bed with my TikTok and my little glass of water beside my bed. And I'm gonna go into hermit mode, because we're all built for connection. We just look at that connection in different ways at different times. So our targeted culture-driven goals are what we need for program improvement. And it has to be a collective all-in from all members of the learning community. You have to know, if you're an educator, you have to get a pulse on the culture of your people that you're leading. If you are a teacher in the classroom, you've got to get a pulse on your students. If you are admin, if you are data, if you say, well, I'm just the person that greets them when we come in the door. We're going to get back to you. As I said, we would. I always want to validate that, because I've had people say, oh, well, I'm just that person. Watch when somebody puts just in front of something. Well, I just do this. I just do that. And the thing I always want to encourage them with is that, no, you do a lot more than that. And in fact, you can make or break your program, because that first interaction, it may have taken everything in the world for that student to pick up the phone and call. I had a young woman tell me, she kept making an appointment, cancel, making an appointment, cancel, making an appointment, cancel. And the fourth time she showed up, and I'm like, hey, I'm so glad it worked out today. And she said, I actually came all the other times. And I was like, unpack that for me. And she said, the first time I got to the stoplight right outside the parking lot, the second time I got to the parking lot, the third time I had my hand on the handle And now today I walked in the door. And it was that slow progression because there was that anticipation of, am I going to be cared for? Am I going to be welcome? And again, there was a lot in her invisible backpack when we started unpacking that thing. So getting that buy-in from everybody, having those staff development sessions when you say, these are our non-negotiables for culture. We are student first. We are inclusive, and unpack what that looks like. All of those things so that everybody has buy-in with that. But the only way you're going to have buy-in with that is to do a really, really good inspection. And this became the hardest thing. I will hands down say this was the hardest thing the PLC did. When you get the retention guide, there's something that we call yes, I know it does exist. There's something called a culture evaluation worksheet, and there's a workshop. The first is kind of the exercise we did today where, hey, what are your non-negotiables? What are the 1 to maybe 3 things? Because if we can't be all things to all people, so don't start with 10. If you just even want to say one thing, that whole trend about, I'm not going to make a resolution, I'm going to focus on one word. I'm fully behind that because we can be really intentional with that. Figure out what that is, and then how you doing? The second part of it is reflection exercise for you. If this is what you say you want to be, what does that look like in all of these pieces? And I think it's important for us to stop with that. I think if you're a really, really introspective person, you can kind of push yourself on some of the answers to some of those things. And we can feel like, or think, or assume that we're in a really good spot. The third part of that is a survey to give your students. And that's the part where, when those things came in contrast with each other, when I say I had people calling and crying, I had people calling and crying. When I said I had emails that said, I don't know what to do this month because I'm broken, that happened as well. One of the educators, and she would tell you if she was standing right here, you know how you have like younger parents and they're like, my child's never going to behave like that. My child's never going to do, I mean, Charlie does have perfect children. It's never going to happen. Anytime, and we always say that in test prep, anytime an answer isn't an absolute, it's probably not the right answer, because very, very little times are there absolutes. But she said, I don't need to focus on safety and comfort because I know 100% of my students feel safe. It's not a doubt in my mind. I do this, this, and this. They call me mama. They give me hugs. I know they feel safe. 100%. When she did the third part of that culture workshop, she got results. 75% didn't feel comfortable asking questions in class. Wow. 60% had a negative experience with someone else in the class that is a deterrent for them coming to class on the days that they know that person is going to be there. And she was gutted because she said, if she said anything else you could have found wrong, but she said that was the one thing that I had like that. It was that Icarus moment for her, like, this was the one thing I knew I was doing. And so for her, because we are works of heart, it broke her because she just felt like that was where her confidence, that was where her identity was living and what she was doing. And she found out she had some more work to do in that regard. Flash forward, she has one of the most tight-knit groups of students in a tight-knit community after working through some of these things over the last couple of years. So much so that she had an event where we all trying to do mandatory things, but sometimes we got to bring them all in to have these things. And so it was more of a celebratory, we'll talk about celebration in a second, more of a celebratory event, bringing in folks, and she made it really, really clear, you need to be here. You need to be here. You need to be here. And so she's there. She had a couple of folks that didn't show up. Some of them had called, some of them were just no-shows. And so she's getting to the celebration part of this. And so she finally got one little assistant because she was a one-person show, and she's knocking on the door, and she's like, no, because she's trying to give her time and attention there. And so she finally goes out and she said, you've got to come and talk to this young lady. She won't stop calling. And so she goes back out, and she said she just wants to tell you why she's not here. And so because this person is still pretty sensitive, she's like, oh my gosh, did I make it mandatory and to make somebody feel not safe? Like she's already like turning that in on herself. Did I make another mistake? So she's like, hey, you know what's going on? And she said, I just really wanted to call and tell you, I'm so sorry I'm not there. My mother was killed by her boyfriend last night. I'm still here with the police and we're at the hospital. And she's like, baby, stop. And she said, I had to call. She said, I'm so sorry. She's like, don't worry about that. Like, why did you feel like you needed to call? And she said, you're my safe place. And that was a redemption moment for her. So she wouldn't have known that had she not asked some of these questions. She wouldn't have known that if she hadn't felt the pain that she felt from that. And so there's growth in that reflection. So I made that sound really appealing. You're all going to want to back. I really want to go back and do that culture workshop, but I encourage you to do that. Environments to support student safety must be prioritized. You look at that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, fancy term. Down on the bottom, what's on the bottom? Not yet. What's on the bottom? Food. That's your food, your housing, basic needs, those types of things. And then that becomes a category where, unless you do have specialized services, we can kind of get in our heads and say, okay, I can't do much about that, but I can just build every possible relationship with a student. So they come in the door and welcome, I'm your second home, and you get to all these, that's typically that big, boisterous, kind of personality that does that. But in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a second layer there. And that second layer is safety. That second layer is rebuilding that foundation of trust. That second layer is, no, I don't want a hug from you. I don't want the proverbial welcome wagon because you haven't shown me that I can trust you. You haven't shown me that this is a safe place. And so environments to support student safety have to be prioritized. Is there something you wanted to add, or folks online, if you had anything?
Share it whenever you're at the end of this slide.
Okay, great. Contextualized instruction is essential for that effective classroom culture. That touch it, see it, feel it. Again, that being seen and known. Some of those same studies where the neuroscience had the little cappity cap things on. This one I love. I love it because of the information, but I love it because it is kind of sad. So they did a big study. And they brought in a group of people and they had the electrode things on. And before the study, they said, we want you to bring something that brings you joy, whether it's a picture, like multiple pictures of things that bring you joy. And so they had them interact with those items, whether it was a picture or a memento or whatever. And they're watching their brains and they're lighting up when they're talking about it, when they're sharing about it, when they're reminiscing and they're having those memories of a time that, they did feel love or they did feel joy, and they're watching how their brains are lighting up. And while they're doing this, they've got some folks like me and Charlie, and we're walking around and they're asking folks, where are you from and what's your name? And, all of these types of things. They go and they take a break, they come back in, and then they're just having normal interactions. They go on to the presentation part of the research. And as they're going through, they're remembering people's names and they're saying, well, hey, I was talking to Sheila at the break. Guess what Sheila's little light did when I said her name? For a split second, being seen and being recognized just by your name gives you the same illicit feeling as love and joy. What makes me sad about that is we're very disconnected as a culture, if that's what it takes. Anybody got Gen Z? So you've got those students right now, they're 13 to 27, 28. Okay. Gen Z is a completely different animal. And I love our sweet baby Gen Zs. I'm raising 2 of them. And Charlie and I do a separate session about that particular group. They are the most connected generation, but they are the most isolated generation. They have never known a time without technology, but they cannot have a conversation for the most part. Because I see your sweet little baby face. You probably fall into that category. But there is a researcher who says he thinks that Gen Z, and I fully believe this, they have the ability, because they are change makers. They have lived in a world of mass shootings. They have lived in a world of political unrest. They want to do something about it. They're creators, not consumers for the most part. That's why TikTok and things like that. Like, I want to create something. If that can be harnessed, they're going to change the game. If that can be harnessed, we've got baby boomers that are retiring from trade jobs overnight. Y'all are already seeing it. We're getting away. Thank everybody under heaven that we're getting away from the only way to be successful is to have a 4-year degree. No, that's not true. And we need to fill those trade jobs. And so as we have that generation stepping into that, if they can harness that. So there's a generational researcher and he said it hinges on one thing. How are they going to deal with the mental health crisis that exists in that generation? They are 2 and 3 times more anxious. They are called the anxious generation. They are 2 and 3 times more anxious than the generation before them. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. We talk, these are the kids, if you're an Xer like me, come on, where are my Xers? We're going to survive the zombie apocalypse. Yeah. We were those latchkey kids. You got Hot Pockets and Capri Suns in the refrigerator. Figure it out. So we're gonna do that. But what he is showing is that their ability to interact is largely based on what they have experienced in the world around them while their frontal cortex was being changed. While I grew up having tornado drills, what kind of drills did you have when you were in high school? You had active shooter drills. So all of a sudden, it's not duck and cover. It's grab your backpack, make sure it has a textbook in it, because we've done the studies and a bullet can be stopped or can be slowed down by that textbook. When you are growing up in that, it cannot help but change your brain chemistry. So even just that alone, tell me why you're anxious. And it's a totally different thing. And then we got Alpha coming up behind. We're gonna pray for them because they gonna need it too. But Gen X can change the world. We just have to give them the tools to do it and support that. So that contextualized instruction, being seen, being known, and it's, you know, again, we have all these things. Well, I don't have time to go and research all this thing about what Roger wants to do. At minimum, if you know that Roger wants to be a welder and you're given a math lesson, hey, Roger, listen up, because when you become a welder, you're going to use this. Bam, bam, she sees me. She knows my name. She knows something about what I want to do. Sadly, it doesn't take much, but we can make those type of investments. A positive learning environment is powerful. It's a change agent. A classroom culture that is safe and conducive to learning with positive rapport among all participants is essential for adult learners. You were going to add something here, sir?
Yeah, I don't know where I want to go now. Yeah, I'm just looking at. What I like to share with this, I mean, we kind of talked about it in that idea at the beginning of, you know, you're at a restaurant, you're overhearing. I mean, that would be my challenge to you is how often are you soliciting that feedback? As a teacher, how often are you soliciting that feedback from your students? Once a week, once a month? About the direction of your class, about the materials you're giving them, about your instructional style. Not that all of that is up in the air and like debatable, but it'd be valid to kind of find that out, to find out if they are learning, if they do feel comfortable, if they do like this type of activity over that type of activity. And as a program admin, I mean, how often are you surveying your teachers? How often are you surveying the students for kind of that other cultural ideas of safety, of, you know, other types of supports and needs? And so, I mean, that would just be what I would say. It's difficult. And it can be, like you said, it can be gutting if you think we've got this thing figured out and you're getting all these responses saying that, you know, contrary to that. But that would just be what I would challenge you all to do as a pretty, I say it's simple. It's simple to kind of think and implement, but it's not as simple to then take all that and digest it and do something with it. But in the guide, you mentioned this, Jen, at the back, she was talking about that culture workshop or kind of check-in, but you know, here, this is the survey from a teacher to a student. I'll just read off a few of the things the student can respond to here. It says, I feel comfortable asking my teacher questions, right? It would be helpful to know that if you're in the classroom. Do your students feel that or not? I feel comfortable asking my other classmates questions. That would be pretty important too, right? If I feel that everyone's going to make fun of me if I have this thing I've always wanted to know, but I don't want to raise my hand, then is that student ever really going to be able to learn in your class? I feel comfortable sharing ideas and opinions in class. I would describe my class as safe, homework and assignments. I understand what is expected of me. You know, and then it goes on and on and on about other kind of class stuff and progress. And at the end, there's some more of like a fill in the blank. So, you know, when you get this, everyone will get a copy of this at the end. I mean, this could be something you could just copy out and, you know,
reproducible.
Maybe do it at the end of the semester, or maybe do it at the beginning of the semester in August, and it'd be a great way to kind of start and kick things off. So something to think about.
And then what are you going to do with that information? Because that's the thing too, in building relationships with students is we want to model a really good feedback response for them. We want to teach them how to take that feedback. That's where my heart really is for certain age groups that haven't been taught how to take that feedback, is to say, hey, thank you so much. Because they might be kind of worried to write something there. Hey, thank you so much for telling me that didn't work for you. What might work for you? And then when they see you implement something, that's what's putting your money where your mouth is. You know, she's not just saying she cares about me, she's showing me. So those things are really important. All right, so getting connected. So after you have built that kind of where, this is the medium. This is the medium for keeping those, keeping the students in class, keeping them engaged in its relationships. They are the glue of student retention. They hold everything together. If you don't know your relationships with your students and you aren't even trying, then your roster is just, it's gonna deplete. It doesn't matter if you are the most amazing teacher in the world. you're going to be talking to a brick wall because there's going to be a wall that's up there. Students excel when they feel known and cared for by their teacher. You never know they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That old adage that's there. Positive student-teacher relationships improve instruction. They can't not. If you're dying for examples and contextualization and you know things about your students, then you're going to have a whole wealth of examples. We just talked about the welding example. You know, someone else, I remember I had a student that she's like, I hate fractions. And I said, but you want to be a baker. Come on, sugar. Like you're working with fractions. Like, come on, let's contextualize that a little bit. So they can't help but improve instruction when you know things about your students. Teacher retention also increases when teachers establish strong bonds. Again, we're not necessarily going to be retained by all these external things. I remember one time as an admin, we were hiring a teacher and we really needed and wanted him to come and start right then. He's going to be moving from out of state. He really felt like that was where he was supposed to be next. And he and his wife felt like that's where they were going to be. We wanted him in February and he said, I can't come until May. I'm like, we want you in February. He said, I can't come until May. And we're like, we're going to, help with moving and all these things. And he said, nope. And he starts naming students that are about to take exams. He starts naming students that are about to get their credential. Man, if that didn't make us want him more, because then we're like, all right, we'll wait till May. We'll figure it out until May. Because he was retained. That kept him where he needed to be because he had that relationship with the student. Because if you don't know your students, if they're just a number, then it is, oh, well, I guess they didn't pass again. But if it's, oh my gosh, this is Juan, and I know that he's got a 2-year-old daughter and he's got this opportunity and he's got to pay these bills and we know all these things, then we are invested in that. So teacher retention improves as well. Peer collaboration. Here's where that research is coming out about that tight alignment and that motivational factor with peers. Does anybody teach your primarily self-contained ESL or ESOL? Okay. You have a different vibe in your classroom, don't you? Yeah. Yeah. There are so many things. If we could figure out the strategies and bottle what happens in ESL environments and give that to everybody else, we would be doing some amazing things. You have distinct challenges. Don't get me wrong. You have distinct challenges, but that peer-to-peer interaction, there's a different solidarity that's there. I taught when I first started teaching. And my background was in poverty studies, and I was teaching younger students during the day. And then I had their aunts, uncles, grandparents, like houses of 15 or 20. They're migrant farm workers. And so they'd come out of the date fields and then they would be with me in the evenings. Some of the most hardworking people you've ever met. They've worked since 4 o'clock in the morning. They go home, they have this lovely dinner with their families, and then they come and they're there in the classroom. And that bond was very, very unique. And it was very special. And they held each other accountable with that. You'll see some just different things that the teachers in the PLC, when you get the guide, that they did to encourage that. Just different things to group up your students to encourage that. Sometimes within that same group, you will have a cultural split. I did not understand that folks from Mexico don't really enjoy spending time with folks from Ecuador. Did not occur to me. You could have put a proverbial piece of red tape down the bottom of that. And so you're looking for those activities to kind of bring that group together. They share some of those things in the guide as well. Educator collaboration is powerful. This is powerful. Talking to each other, at minimum, having somebody else that gets it. And that's how your students feel too, right? Okay, they might not have the exact same experience as I do, but they get it. I taught with a co-teacher one time, and it was an old rickety building. It had one of those pocket doors that come between. And every now and then we would just go. And then we were good for the next half hour. We just need to look at them like, are you? Yep. And because it's that collaboration, it's somebody, hey, you know what this feels like. And I think we have to encourage each other and hold each other accountable to not just commiserate, but to commiserate and then plan and grow from that, because it can be easy to get stuck in that. If an adult does not feel that they are part of a group, it will impact their learning. It will impact their desire to stay in class, whether in a physical classroom or a virtual online session. Forming and maintaining relationships will improve student retention. There's a teacher that she started a postcard system, and she would, if you said somebody's not here this week, put their name. She would go back and add in their address for confidentiality purposes and all that. If you miss them this week, we'll send them a postcard. Everybody likes to get fun mail, right? The other teachers, they started with the WhatsApp and started like discussion threads. Hey, Sheila, where you been this week? Hey, Charlie, where you been this week? And that's different because then you're doing a couple of different things. You know, you're missed. When you're not there, you know you're missed. Okay, maybe I am a part of this group. Maybe I do need to come back and do that. Anything else you want to say about relationships?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the thing I think about when I kind of try to summarize this whole topic, is, I think what I saw, living, teaching and working in the state of Oklahoma is if the student is only connected to that one teacher and that teacher leaves for whatever reason, then what happens to that student? They are very, unanchored. And so, but I found that like students would walk into class, I would go around the state and I would observe classrooms. They would walk into class, they would talk to no one else. Sometimes they would barely talk to the teacher because they had their independent work they were doing. And then they would leave. So they weren't acknowledged by other people, the other students in class, they weren't really acknowledged. And so in my mind, this is basically trying to do the opposite of that. It's like, how often are other people saying hi? How often do other people in the building know who that person is? How are there other teachers that are saying hi if possible? Who in the class is also connecting with the student? So I think the more we can do that, we're kind of ensuring ourselves against if someone does leave, that there are all of these other connections that are going to help the student still feel like they have this place, as opposed to, well, I'm not sure, let's say Cynthia, I go to Cynthia's class. Oh, but now Cynthia, for whatever reason, she's gone for 3 weeks, so I'm not going to come for 3 weeks because she's not going to be there. It's like, well, we need to figure out how to get them past that idea and still want to come to class, even if their one main connection isn't going to be there. So how do we create all those other little connections?
And especially if you are with another teacher and you know some of those students are going to roll up for whatever reason, different level, different program or whatever with another teacher, starting to help them make those connections, starting to, whatever confidentiality and moving forward with that student to make that connection. And then as a side note, you can bend over backwards and there's still maybe students that you just don't make connections with. And you need to be okay with that. And you need to say, Charlie, I'm not really making a connection with John. You want to talk to him and see if you have anything in common? I mean, it's that humility to be able to say you don't have it all together, because we don't. And so it's being able to do that. I think the other thing is I hear a lot of folks say, well, I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to build relationships with my students. And I saw this lovely example. And I think we've all got, time that we're commuting that we're using for other things. Hopefully you're not texting while you're driving. But this individual, he said, okay, he taught, which many of us did or do, K-12, and then he had a 25-minute commute to the adult ed center that he was going to in the afternoon. And so he chose to, each day on his drive, that 25 minutes, he chose 5 different students and he made himself think about each student for 5 minutes. And so, okay, I've got Charlie. What do I know about Charlie? Can I tell you 3 things about Charlie? If I can't tell myself 3 things about Charlie, that's one of my goals that week. I'm going to learn something else about Charlie. All right. What do I know about Linda? Can I think about Linda? What do I know about what she needs? Oh, her daughter had a soccer game yesterday. Let me ask about that. Oh, let me think about John. I know he's got an interview coming up. Let me ask about that. So that each day he's at least got 5 students that are top of mind. And then the next day, so by the end of the week, he had about 20, 25, 30 students, so the math just worked out. By the end of the week, he could get through that whole roster with that. We've all got those. Again, we can't live in extremes. I can't run 10 miles, so I'm going to watch Netflix. I firmly put myself in that category. There is way to start making those strides. All right, real quick, because I know we're running down on time. Measuring progress, tracking, improving, and then here's this last one, celebrating gains of all kinds. Student data is multifaceted. It's quantitative and qualitative. I always say we should get rid of those words. I saw this thing, it was perfect. It said, I think we should stop calling quantitative and qualitative. We should call it numbery and feely. Speaking my language, but we need both. We need those numbers. We need that data if we're going to use it, because I think we've all been in environments where anybody seen Office Space? That's a Gen X thing, like back in the day, and it revived with they had the TPS reports, right? And it was like the boss came in and said, this is the best thing. This is going to save the world. And then 2 weeks later, they're not talking about it anymore. We can kind of do that with assessment sometimes because it become like white noise. Oh, okay, well, okay, that's good to know. They didn't pass again, or they, missed this or whatever. We need to start looking at patterns for that. And we need to start teaching our students how to do that. We've got mechanisms in, if you're using essential education, where you can run different reports, where if you've got, I mean, put yourself through this practice. Did you give an assessment that day and 30% of the class missed question 8 and question 16? Then you say, oh, well, is there something in the curriculum? Is there something I'm doing or not doing? Look for those patterns, and then help the students look for those patterns, because it's easy for them to say, oh, I didn't pass again. How many times have you heard that? Oh, I didn't pass again. But rarely did I not pass, I failed. That's just not true, because then you can walk that student back to, okay, well, you didn't get a 145, but you got a 142. What did you get before? You got a 140. Let's look back at this trajectory. And now let's look and see, what are some of the common questions you're missing? And an example is someone realized that there was a certain type of question. You know, GED likes to do all those different question types. There was a certain type of question that, regardless of subject, regardless of where they were in the content, they tended to miss that type of question. And so it's working through those types of things in tracking, improving, and celebrating those gains. If we know our students are results driven, then we've got to reward that along the way. And it may not be as much or as difficult as you think. We need to lean into effort-based goals too. Hey, you showed up 3 times this week, when you usually, you know, we don't need to dwell on the past, but hey, you showed up 3 times this week, you know, hey, instead of 5 minutes, you worked for 15 minutes. Yay. These types of things. And we've got to lean into that. We need those student-friendly tracking tools so that they can see that they're making those gains, even if it's not the end all be all. And so that's where we talk about goal setting and walking through. Man, you want to do a double bang for your buck. You want to get to know your student. Sit down and work through a goal setting worksheet with them. Sit down and ask them, okay, that's your end goal, but what's going to take you to get there? And then break those down into those small measurable pieces. And hey, when you pass that, this section of the math, what are you going to do? How are you going to celebrate that? What are you going to, and because as you learn what motivates them and what incentives they want to go after, you're going to learn a lot from that too. Some of the folks in the PLC, one of the things that they were charged with is figure out how to celebrate that. Again, I have people calling me. I don't want to share in the group. Why don't you want to share in the group? It's a counseling session for me too. Why don't you want to share in the group? Well, I said, are you stuck? Is what you're doing not working? Like, walk me through that. No, it's working, but I don't want to share in the group. And I said, tell me. They told me, and then I had 4 other people call that same week, and it was the same thing, that they didn't want to share in the group. That was working. And the reason they didn't want to share it is because they instituted a treasure box in their classroom. And they didn't want to share it because they said, I was hesitant to do it because I work with adult learners. I did not want to pull it down to, you know, a lower level. I didn't want to be offensive in any way. I didn't want to do this. And they said it was going off like gangbusters. And they didn't know why. I mean, it's pencils and stickers and these types of things. And so it's going off. They're like, oh yeah, I got the sticker today, you know, and it's like they're celebrating with their friends and they're putting these things up. And so one of the teachers pulled this young lady aside and she said, I'm glad that y'all like it. I just tried it just to see. I'm glad that y'all like it, but why do you like it? Like, what's so great? It's just a pencil. Like, and she said, you really don't get it, do you? And she said, oh, that's why I'm asking you. And she said, we weren't the kids that ever got to pick out of the treasure box. We never got to go up and get that pencil or get that sticker. We didn't have that thing to put on the refrigerator. We are in the redemption business. And that redemption, that redeeming is what is going to retain your students. I know we're out of time, so we're going to need to stop.
Yeah, to summarize this, like in my mind, thinking about the idea of retention, a lot of our students have a long journey to get whatever goal they have. And they can't, a lot of times, again, that idea of stepping back and seeing the big picture, we don't do that well either. And so how do we, again, celebrate those short-term gains and point them out the progress they're making? Because they don't realize, oh, wow, I've just gone through 20 pages. I've made a lot of progress, but they still see the other 400 pages of the book or whatever it is. And so in my mind, we could go into a lot more of the tracking and improving part of it, but how can we point out more of what they're doing so that they feel a little bit more encouraged? Say, whoa, yeah, you're right. I am making some progress. I couldn't really see that from my vantage point. So I think it's sometimes just pointing that out to them, whether it's I've attended so many days in a row, I've progressed through so many lessons or whatever it might be, but just helping them see that they are making that incremental progress. and moving towards the goal. I think that's the results oriented aspect. You're moving towards this goal, so.
You're still moving forward. So in the guide, you're going to see lots of different ways that people tracked, celebrated, measured, all of those things. The sixth anchor is then, when do you need to be ready?
Mhm.
I said spoiler alert all the time. So that's us constantly putting tools in our toolbox, constantly learning things. And so that's that professional development piece. And with that, Charlie and I do professional development every Tuesday, absolutely free, online. It's called Tuesdays with Essential Education, friendly known as Tweed. And you can join us there. If you can't join in person, just go ahead and sign up anyways. You'll get the recording, you'll get the slide deck, you will get a certificate of participation for 1 hour of PD. Yes, online. So you'll go online, you go to PD or professional development somewhere along that, and you just scan down and we're down there. And so again, you'll see the month in advance. You can sign up for any and all, and then even if you can't attend, you'll get that. So you do get an hour of PD credit, and most of your admin will take that. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
in that cultural workshop that you were mentioning, like, how does that go?
Yes, so in the guide, you're going to have all the materials you need to do that. So there in the appendix, there's a reproducible section in the back where you're going to see the exercises to take yourself through, and then you can make photocopies. If you like how that's worded, you can make photocopies of that and use that with your students. Or some teachers have said, oh, I like that part of it, but I don't like this other part, or I want to tailor this more to my students, or I want to ask an additional question. All the PLC, they just say, just learn from us, just take it.
The app.
No, the guide, you can download a digital copy if you worked well, if you work better with digital copies, that's there too. But we have hard copies today for you to take. Yeah. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you for